So what's up, guys? It's been about a month since the last time that I made a video here in this studio, so I almost forgot about how to put the lights and everything here. It took me a while today to remember everything. But now I'm back and we are back with another video, and today it's a beautiful day outside. It is raining, and before, when I used to do street photography with a 50mm 1.8, a rainy day would never be considered a good day. It would be considered a bad day because this lens has no weather sealing. But since last month that I own the 70-200, and it's my favorite lens already, it's a good day, it's a beautiful day, it's an amazing day because I can get some pretty sick shots especially when it's raining and when it's snowing. I love those kind of shots. So today, as you already know from the title of the video, I'm going to be comparing these two lenses, the 50mm 1.8 versus the 70-200mm F2.8, and I don't think anyone else has done that comparison in YouTube before, because these really aren't lenses to compare to each other. This is a very cheap lens, this is a very expensive lens, this is a pro photographer's lens, this is a beginner photographer's lens, this is super light, this is super heavy, but they have something in common for me, for how I've used them. I've used them both for street photography. I just want to describe what they feel like, what to expect from them, because I remember a few years back when I was starting with my photography and I used to shoot, with this camera, the 500D. And I remember watching one video from Peter McKinnon saying it was something like why every pro photographer needs a 70-200, and I loved that video. I loved what he showed there, the background blur, the separation of the subject from the background, the reach and everything, and I've been dreaming of that lens for the last years. And now that it's here and that I've shot with it for about a month, I started becoming nostalgic a little bit about the 50mm, which actually I haven't been using for 4 months at this point, ever since I got the 24-70 actually. So I just wanted to put my thoughts a little bit together about these two lenses, why that is that I'm not using this anymore. Let me put this back because it's standing on the way of me and my coffee. So let's start with the overall build quality. Now these two lenses are both made of plastic, so there isn't much of a difference there. This nifty 50 on the outside has only one switch here to switch the function of the control ring from focusing to controlling the ISO, which I've set it to, versus the 70-200mm has 5 switches. They are a bit bigger, but they feel a bit the same, and it also has 3 rings, the first being the zoom ring, of course, because this isn't a prime lens. Then we have 2 rings separated, the focusing ring from the control ring. It is much faster to switch between manual focus and autofocus because you only need to flip the switch and then you can start focusing manually. Versus on this lens, you have to flip the switch first and then go to the menu and change from autofocus to manual focus. So that is the first difference in usability between these two lenses. Another thing you get when you pay 3,200 euros versus 200 euros is image stabilization. This lens has 5 stops of image stabilization and 3 different modes of stabilization depending on what kind of subjects you're shooting, whether they are still subjects or subjects that are moving left and right, versus this has no image stabilization at all. Another one is obviously the weight. This weighs quite a bit at 1070 grams. It is actually very light for its kind, but anyways, this is only 160 grams, so, you know, worlds of difference. And you also, when you put them in the camera, you hold them differently. When you have the 70-200 mounted in the camera, you mostly want to hold it by the lens. In comparison to this small lens, you almost don't touch the lens at all when you have this mounted to the camera. You only grab it by the grip, and there is also a lot of space between the lens and the fingers. And so they feel different in the hand. But you will start to realize that when you get into the professional lenses, to L-series lenses, that your setup will become much heavier than it used to be in the beginning, when it was kind of like a toy moving around. So when I compare them now, I feel like I'm holding a toy in my hand when the 50mm is mounted to it, which is a good thing because it's not tiring. But the bad thing could be, for example, that you feel the micro jitters quite a bit, versus with a heavy lens it stabilizes your hands pretty well. When it comes to image quality, I like both of them actually, but especially the 70-200 because of the amount of the compression that you get at 200mm, but I like it more especially for 3D pop. So let's take a look at these two photos side by side. One of them was taken with a 50mm and the other one with a 70-200. Just ignore the background blur for the moment and focus on the subject. When you look at them up close, which one of the photos looks more 3D to you? Which one of the subjects looks more 3D to you? Where do you see the creases more? Where do you notice them more? Where does it look more like they're jumping out of the photo into your face? Even though the 3D pop isn't really a measurable thing, to me personally it looks like the 70-200 is much better at that, even though this comparison isn't super fair because it's not the same subject being photographed. But this is actually an example. I've noticed it with this lens on many other subjects. Actually, since the beginning, since I got it, I noticed that there is usually 3D pop there, which makes me love this lens that much more, and that is a huge improvement that you get for your money. Now, don't get me wrong, don't expect this 3D pop from every L series lens from Canon, because I also have the 24-70 here, and even though it's sharp and all, I don't see that 3D pop on that lens, for example. Other things when it comes to image quality are sharpness and chromatic aberration. I think they're both very sharp, but the 50mm gets much softer around the edges than the 70-200 does. And also around the edges of the 50mm there's a lot of chromatic aberration happens and there's a mess of colors. Whereas with this, you can also see some chromatic aberration from this lens, but not nearly as much. So that is another thing that you get from expensive glass. And also that is just pixel peeping, so it's not that important. Another important difference between these two lenses is how people react to you when they see you on the street shooting with them. So I've generally noticed that when they see you shooting with a 70-200mm, especially pointed at them, then it seems like they get kind of weird about it and they forget how to walk normally, or they stare at you a little bit. Versus when you shoot with a 50mm, you kind of fly under the radar a little bit because your overall setup is much smaller. Just know that you are going to attract a lot more attention from people with this lens, and the white color doesn't help with that either. But on the flip side, because of the 200mm, you don't have to go so close to the people to get a portrait of them. With 200mm, you can even get great shots from the other side of the street, which I find really amazing for this lens and which is why I love it so much. And when I went to take some shots with these two lenses last week on the street, because I wanted to remember what it was like to use this, because I hadn't touched it since December, then I noticed that it was a bit uncomfortable to go so close to people. I noticed that you couldn't get them really separated, and that is actually great. I liked the results that I got from it. It's just that with this lens at 70mm, you can include more of the background with the photo if that's what you want. But if you only want to take a portrait of the person, then you also have that option. And that's what I'm trying to say, that you have more options with this lens versus with this, you're kind of stuck with what you get. Also, you don't only get the subject separated, but also the background blur is super smooth, and I've managed to get some amazing background blur with this lens, which I was never able to do with this before, because even though the 1.8 aperture blurs out the background completely, because of the lack of compression, you can still see a lot of patterns in the background, whereas with this, sometimes you can get the background look super uniform. And that is the second thing that I love so much about this lens after the 3D pop. So let's just try to wrap things up with the old question: does gear generally matter, and does expensive gear make a difference or not, and why? I think gear actually matters a lot more than people like to admit, especially here on YouTube. If you don't have the skills and you don't know how to use a new piece of gear, then of course you can't get good results with it. But I don't think that that's the problem with most people. I think the problem is that they can't get their hands on good gear. Because once you get a new piece of gear, you have a lot of time to learn how to use it. And so I think gear actually matters. It matters because it makes your job faster having that extra ring. And it also matters because it is a zoom lens and it gives you many perspectives of your subject in one lens versus having only 50mm fixed, and that's what you have to play with. So I hope I could give you a detailed description of what to expect when you do this upgrade. And if you have already done the upgrade, let me know in the comments below if you agree to the points that I mentioned and if you want to add something to it. And if you haven't done the upgrade yet, then make sure to leave a question if you have one. I'll try to answer all of them. Thanks for watching, guys. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Alright, it's acceptable. Can you see anything even? It definitely tastes as good as I hoped. Let's wipe some water away.